Thank you, Pallavi, for that kind introduction. And I must thank the Fortis management team and Bayer for giving me an opportunity to talk about abnormal uterine bleeding in this particular webinar. If you look at abnormal uterine bleeding, if in our regular gynae OPD, it forms around 1/3 of our patient crowd. When we see an irregular OPD, almost 30% of the patients who we see are abnormal uterine bleeding. If you look at the prevalence in the world, it is around 30%, and in the Indian scenario, it is almost around 18 to 20%. Now, this is a very important slide. Now, when what do you mean? What is the definition of abnormal uterine bleeding? If you look at the FIGO classification that has, it was introduced way back in 2011, and also modifications were done by 2018 and 19. What is abnormal uterine bleeding? Basically, we need to look at the detailed menstrual history, which means that you look at the frequency of the period, the duration, the regularity, and the flow volume. When you talk about frequency, it's very often we see patients coming and telling us that, and as general practitioners, you also must be aware that they come with a common complaint saying that we are having periods twice in a month, doctor, and that is we find that abnormal. So it is important to know what is the duration of cycle. So anywhere between 24 to 38 days is considered as normal. So a patient may get a period on the first week, in the first week of the month, and the end of the last week. So that is still considered normal, though she has 2 periods in that month. So any period cycle which is less than 24 days or more than 38 days is considered as abnormal. Now, if you look at the duration of flow, the normal duration of flow is generally within 8 days. The period should stop within 8 days. If it goes beyond 8 days, then it is considered as a prolonged flow. Now, look at the regularity. The variations between the cycles in a given year should not be more than 10 days. If the cycle duration variation is more than 10 days, then it is an irregular period. And one thing I would like to stress upon is that when you look at the cycle length, it is important you see from the first day of the period to the first day of the next period, because many patients think that it is from the last day of the period to the first day of the period. So that doesn't make sense. So it is important you get into the details of the menstrual history. Now, flow volume. Flow volume can be light, normal, heavy. Now, though the definition says that more than 80 ml of blood is supposed to be heavy flow, no one can sit and measure the amount of menstrual fluid that is going out. So you have a very rough pictorial assessment of the uterine bleeding. So when you ask the patients that is the sanitary pad lightly stained, moderately stained, or is it heavily stained? So if you look at this pictorial assessment score, more than 150 points is considered as heavy menstrual bleeding. But let's have a thumb rule that when you have the pad being fully soaked and you have about 2 or 3 pads in a day, that means the patient is having a heavy flow. Normally, menstrual flow should not clot, but if it starts clotting, that means the flow is heavy. So these are all normal way, easy ways of knowing whether the patient is having a heavy flow or a normal flow. Similarly, intermenstrual bleeding or unscheduled bleeding. Unscheduled bleeding can happen when a patient is on some medications, which could be any of those medications like the COCs or steroids, or patient is on a Mirena. So any of these things can cause unscheduled bleeding. Intermenstrual bleeding, once again, you need to get into the details, whether it's an early cycle bleeding, mid-cycle bleeding, late cycle bleeding, or is it happening very irregularly. So all this detailed history will give us an idea about what could be the probable diagnosis. Now, how do you go around evaluating abnormal uterine bleeding. A detailed history, as I told you, is extremely important. It is not just the menstrual history. It is important that you also go into the obstetric history, because even obstetric history gives us a clue about what could be the reason for this abnormal uterine bleeding. And you need to go into the medication history. What medications is the patient on? Then what regarding the past history of the patient, is there associated medical illnesses, especially thyroid related disorders, and also a family history. All these things are very, very important in arriving at a diagnosis even before you touch the patient. Now, clinical examination is also extremely important to rule out that the bleeding is coming from the uterus and the cervix, and it is not coming from the vulva, from the forehead, from the vagina. So it is very important that you do a speculum examination to understand where this is bleeding from. I have had patients who have had rectal bleeding and have come to me saying that they have had a PV bleeding. On examination only, then it was revealed that it is the vaginal bleeding. Similarly, hematuria can be confused to a vaginal bleeding. So it's important that you see where exactly is the bleeding from. And one of the most important sort of unwritten rule is that any patient who is entering a gynae OPD is pregnant until otherwise proven. So whenever you have a patient with abnormal uterine bleeding, unless it is a postmenopausal lady, if he is in the perimenopausal or in the reproductive age group, it is important that we rule out pregnancy, because pregnancy related bleedings can also present to you as abnormal uterine bleeding. A simple urine pregnancy test will solve the problem. So it is important that we rule out pregnancy before you embark on management of abnormal uterine bleeding. Now, whenever you take the history, I wanted to tell you all about this particular thing, that when you take the history, it is important that you also take a history which points out to any coagulopathy in a patient. I understand that coagulopathy is not a very common thing, but it is important when you have a patient coming to you with heavy menstrual bleeding from menarche, then maybe she is one of the candidates who has coagulopathy. And these things like postpartum hemorrhage, that is why I was talking to you about taking a detailed obstetric history. A postpartum hemorrhage may point out towards a coagulopathy. Surgical related bleedings, if the patient has had continuous bleeding after surgeries, then it may be a pointer towards coagulopathy. Similarly, bleeding associated with dental work. Now, if she has 2 or more of the following symptoms, like bruising 1 to 2 times in a month, epistaxis 1 to 2 times per month, frequent gum bleeding, family history of bleeding symptoms, all this should sort of ring the alarm bell saying that there is some sort of coagulopathy there, and then the treatment becomes completely different. Now, what are the investigations? We have very few investigations, very basic investigations for patients with abnormal uterine bleeding. It's important to do a CBC to know what is the type of deficiency if the patient has anemia and what type of anemia the patient has. A TSH is routinely done for these patients just to see if there is any associated hypothyroidism causing menorrhagia, or it could be hyperthyroidism leading to oligomenorrhea or amenorrhea. Now, pelvic scan and TVS, both are important. So it is important that you do both the pelvic scan and the transvaginal scan. Transvaginal scan especially will give you a clear picture about the endometrial thickness, because that gives us an idea as to what is the things that are happening. Now, coming to endometrial biopsy, nowadays we do it as a Pipple biopsy, which is done in an outpatient basis. It does not require any form of anesthesia. So it is a very quick procedure, hardly takes about 3 or 4 minutes to do. Now, and this is done as an outpatient procedure. So when the patient comes to us after taking the history and clinical examination, we may decide to do the endometrial biopsy through Pipple in the same sitting. Now, what are the indications for endometrial biopsy? Now, if the patient comes to you with EUB after 40 years of age, it is better we do a endometrial biopsy to know what is the nature of the endometrium. Now, if the patient's age is less than 40 years, it would be better that we do an endometrial biopsy if there are associated factors like obesity, diabetes, hypertension, polycystic ovarian syndrome, because we know that PCOS is a risk factor for endometrial carcinoma, endometrial hyperplasia, and all that. Now, if you have a very thick endometrium, more than 12 millimeters, then it is advisable to do a PIPL. If you have a family history of malignancy, especially ovarian malignancy, endometrial malignancy, or colonic malignancies, breast cancer, then it is better you rule out this one problem in the endometrium by doing a endometrial biopsy. Now, once you have taken the history and you have evaluated, how is this classified? Abnormal uterine bleeding is now classified by FIGO as, we have a mnemonic called as palm coin. Of course, the coin here has an E. So what does this mnemonic stand for? Polyp, abnormal uterine bleeding could be due to polyps in the endometrium, adenomyosis, leiomyoma, malignancy and hyperplasia. And this one coin stands for coagulopathy, ovulatory dysfunction, endometrial causes, iatrogenic causes, and something that is not defined. We should have, in medicine, we always have one classification called as not defined, because when we don't know anything, we put them into that particular category. Now, how is this? What is the basis of this particular classification? Is that if you look at it, PALM stands for all structural abnormalities, whereas COIN stands for non-structural or functional abnormalities. So the treatment is completely different for something where there is a structural abnormality and where there is no structural abnormalities. Now let us take each particular section separately. Now, someone with an abnormal endometrial, abnormal uterine bleeding with polyps, what is that is recommended? Generally, these polyps are picked up by a transvaginal scan. Sometimes the transvaginal scan tells us that it's a very thick endometrium and they will not be able to pick up this one. When we do a diagnostic hysteroscopy, we end up seeing a polyp and we go ahead and do the procedure, whatever is required. So the treatment generally is that hysteroscopic polypectomy is recommended for younger women who wish to preserve fertility. Now, in some women, you can see that there are multiple endometrial polyps. So once you remove all this endometrial polyps, that means you resect it through the hysteroscope, remove all the polyps. And if that patient says that I'm not too keen on having a pregnancy, it is advisable to put an LNG intrauterine system, that is the Mirena, which is there. We usually put that. And Mirena has really made the lives of the gynecologist very, very comfortable and very easy. The number of uses of the Mirena is innumerable, and it has given an answer to most of our patients where surgery was previously required. Now we solve it with just a device which is kept inside the uterus. So multiple endometrial polyps, it's better to resect and put in an LNG intrauterine system so that it basically suppresses the endometrium and makes it very thin. Now, as you all know that polyps should be sent for histopathology, and you have to follow up that. If it is benign, that is well and good, the treatment ends there. But if there is malignancy, then you should be treated accordingly. Now coming to the next, this one, that is adenomyosis. Now for managing adenomyosis, it is important that we know a few factors. One is that what is the age of the patient? What is the symptomatology? Symptomatology with adenomyosis could be abnormal uterine bleeding, it could be pain, it could be infertility. And are there any associated conditions? And is the patient desirous of pregnancy? So all these things will help us to understand how we are going to manage these patients. Whenever in women with abnormal uterine bleeding and having adenomyosis, and if that person wants to preserve the uterus, but it is not very keen on having conception immediately, then once again, LNG IUS is the way forward. So once put in, it gives you a relief in form of, reducing the flow, reducing the pain, and the patient can be, rest assured for the next 5 years. Now, if a patient is desirous of fertility, then you cannot be using a Mirena, but instead you can be using NSAIDs during periods to relieve the pain. As Dr. Manisha said, treatment of infertility and pain cannot be done simultaneously. So you need to individualize the treatment and see what is the desire of the patient and accordingly treat them. In patients where they are not interested in childbearing and they sometimes the Mirena has not worked, then we have to offer them definitive surgical treatment. I have had patients who have been suffering with adenomyosis for X number of years, and finally at the age of 41, 42, they come to us and saying that, doctor, please do something, get my uterus out. I am not able to handle this anymore. So that time we can either do a non-descent vaginal hysterectomy or a laparoscopic hysterectomy or an open method of hysterectomy. Now, this is just to give you an idea about what is the classification of leiomyomas. Are classified as something that is submucous, intramural, and subserous. In that, you have further classifications saying that whether it is completely in the cavity, or whether a part of it is intramural, most of it is intramural, or part of it is subserous. So this is important because once again, the treatment and the management of AUB associated with leiomyoma depends on where this leiomyoma is. Now, once again, as we all know that every treatment has to be individualized depending upon the age, patty, symptoms, whether they are desirous of fertility, and keeping all this in mind, we have to decide the modality of treatment. Now, if you have a person who wants to keep the uterus, is not too keen on a surgical management, and she's of a younger age group, then the first line of treatment for such patients who have a grade 2 to 6 leiomyomas is tranexamic acid. And try to do one thing when we use tranexamic acid. I have seen many patients who come to me are given, homeopathic doses of tranexamic acid. Tranexamic acid should be given at least 3 to 4 grams per day. You have to give it for it to have a complete 3 to 4 grams of tranexamic acid has to be given. So giving tranexamic acid 500 milligrams twice daily, thrice daily is of no consequence because the patient may not find any relief with that. So ideally, you should give at least 1 gram thrice daily, and only then you may find some benefit. So one of the first lines that is used for management. Oral contraceptive pills also can be used in the management of smaller myomas which are causing menorrhagia. We can use them. Now, if you have a grade 2 to 6 leiomyoma and they want to keep the uterus, but they are not very keen on conceiving as of now, you can even offer them a LNG IUS, a Mirena, and there are many women but who have been sort of treated with this, and they're quite happy with this treatment. But for this, your myoma should be smaller in size. They should not be more than 4 centimeters, and preferably they should not be having a great amount of submucosal component. Now, if all these treatments fails, and if myoma is causing infertility, a myomectomy is recommended, which could be abdominal, open method, laparoscopic, or a hysteroscopic if it is a submucous myoma. Now, submucosal myomas, especially grade 0 and grade 1, if you look at it, you can do a hysteroscopic resection of that myoma if it is less than 4 centimeter in diameter. And in the women above the age of 40 years, and when they are not desirous of continuing keeping their uterus, and if they are having a lot of menorrhagia, there are patients who have had multiple blood transfusions due to severe anemia, it is better off with a surgical treatment where a hysterectomy can be done. You will also have a group of patients with myoma where the LNG has not worked, then they end up having a hysterectomy. Now, LNG IUS can be used in the long-term management of myomas. If you have an intramural myoma and a very small part of it is there is a submucous component, then you can still, in a very select population, you can use. But one thing you have to remember is that when you have a large submucous myoma, especially in the L1 and L0 type of leiomyomas, please do not recommend a LNG device, because most of the times they end up not responding to it, and expulsion is seen very commonly. So you need to individualize your treatment depending upon so many factors. Now, coming to abnormal uterine bleeding, which is associated with malignancy and endometrial hyperplasia. We all know that endometrial malignancy, there is a standard protocol, and one should use that, stick to the standard protocol and go ahead with its management. Now, if there is hyperplasia along with atypia, then it is better that she undergoes a definitive surgical treatment with hysterectomy, unless and until it is in a subgroup of population which is young and who are desirous of fertility. There are treatments with high doses of progesterone, and then they can go ahead with pregnancies. But of course, they'll need a long-term follow-up after their delivery. Now, someone who has no atypia, endometrial hyperplasia, what was previously called a simple hyperplasia without atypia. So now such patients, we can use the levonorgestrel LNG devices, and it was recommended that after 6 months after LNG device, it is better you people. I do a people with the LNG device in situ and see whether there is regression of that hyperplasia. And if there is regression of that hyperplasia, and if there then we just follow them up with a transvaginal scan and a examination, maybe once in 6 months or 1 year, just to look at the endometrial thickness on scan. So it is a very effective way of treating. The LNG device is a very effective way of treating simple hyperplasia. Now, coagulopathy, of course, anything that is associated with coagulopathy, you need to give non-hormonal treatment, which is basically tranexamic acid is the primary option. Of course, patients of this category have to be treated in a multidisciplinary mode, where you have a hematologist in your panel who will also be giving their inputs regarding the treatment of such patients. COCs and LNG devices can be used. Now, coming to ovulatory dysfunction, which is pretty common, it is basically when you have cyclical bleeding and you're having you have ruled out all the other medical causes, then most probably the patient is having an ovulatory dysfunction. One of the first line of therapy is combined oral contraceptive pills, which can be given for about 6 to 12 months, provided patient is not desirous of fertility at that given point of time. Now, when you have an acute bleeding, it is important. We can use the norethistrone, but it has to be given in a tapered fashion for almost 21 days. Get the bleeding under control, and then decide on what is the next mode of treatment. Now, it is important. It is important that we give whatever medical management we give at least for a period of 1 year, and then decide on whether to discontinue the treatment and see whether how the patient behaves, and ask them to keep a menstrual calendar so that we know how their cycles are. Now, surgical intervention is generally not recommended for ovulatory dysfunction, but unless and until all medical management has failed, only then you should think of surgical management. Once again, LNG devices can be used in patients where they are not willing to take combined oral contraceptive pills on a regular basis or on a daily basis. Then we can use the LNG devices. And if contraception is also needed, then this is the best way to treat them. Now, adolescents form a very important group of patients, especially now with PCOS on the rise, with sedentary lifestyle, and the dietary habits now going haywire. We do have a good number of adolescents who come with AUB. Then for them, you can treat them like adults itself. Both hormonal and non-hormonal therapies can be used. So it is a myth that you cannot use oral contraceptive pills in the adolescent population. It is a myth. You can use them. And you can use for a specific period of time, and then tell them to do lifestyle management so that the problems in the body gets rectified. Now, once again, when you don't know the cause, exact cause, you have the entire armamentarium, which you can use any one of them so that you can treat them individually. Now, what are the general managements of the COIN? So tranexamic acid is the first line of therapy. Then in women desiring effective contraception, LNG devices are very useful. COCs are recommended in patients who are not willing for LNG devices. Cyclical progesterones from day 5 to day 26 can be used where you have a section of population where combined oral contraceptive pills cannot be used. You can use this, like you have a patient who's had a childbirth and during that pregnancy has had obstetric cholestasis, or then you can't put them on COCs, then you have to put them on cyclical progesterone. So you have to individualize treatment and accordingly give that. Now, role of previously we were using quite a bit of TCREs and endometrial ablation. All the requirement of these things have come down because of the easy availability of LNG devices. Now, this is just to give you a few examples of my patients. Now, Mrs. P, who was 56 years, she came to me with a history of bleeding once in 2 to 3 years for the last 20 years. She was a para-2 leaving 2 previous 2 normal deliveries, and she had 4 spontaneous miscarriages, and after each miscarriage, she had a DNC. She came to me with this complaint, and when we did a hysteroscopy and DNC, blind DNCs are never done for AUB nowadays. We do only hysteroscopy and DNCs. Blind DNCs should be discouraged. So when we do a hysteroscopy, when I did a hysteroscopy for her, I could see multiple adhesions in the uterine cavity, and I released all the adhesions, and then after that, it came out as a proliferative endometrium, and I even sent off the specimen for tuberculosis, but that came negative. So here, if you can see that that obstetric history of 4 spontaneous miscarriages and 4 DNCs was important, because that was the reason she had so many adhesions. And after releasing all these adhesions, I put in a LNG device so that she doesn't reform adhesions. Now, these are the polyps. I mean, this was one of my patients who was and we did a resection and put in a LNG device. It came out as benign, and we put in a LNG device. Now, this is also a small fibroid polyp which was there, and this we resected out. And I think this is just a video. Sorry, I think this is not playing. So, okay, I go to the next slide. Now, this is just to give you a case scenario where a wrong treatment can cause problems to the patient and will not solve her problem. Mrs. S came to me. She was a para-2 living 2, both were normal deliveries. She had history of menorrhagia since 6 years. She had a past history of blood transfusion for severe anemia due to menorrhagia. Then she underwent all the investigations and scan in her hometown, underwent a Mirena incision 1 year back. She came to me 1 year ago and she had no relief from the symptoms, and then she wanted the removal of the Mirena. Here, counseling was not done very well for the patient, so she was not happy with the Mirena insertion. I think I would like to stress on one thing is that you need to counsel the patients properly before inserting a Mirena. Tell them the pros and cons and what is that they have to expect in the next 6 months. So she did not have any relief, and then we had to remove the Mirena. Now, after 1 year post-COVID, patient presented to me with continuous bleeding and a hemoglobin of 6 grams. On investigation, she was found to have a submucous fibroid, which is almost 3 to 4 centimeters. It was almost jutting, most of it was jutting into the cavity. Now, a person like this who's having a submucous fibroid, you should not put a Mirena inside because that won't work. So this patient, since she was 41 years old, she was not keen on a hysteroscopic resection of fibroid. She wanted a definitive treatment, and I did a non-distant vaginal hysterectomy on her, and patient is doing well. So it is important that you understand what exactly is the patient suffering from and individualize care for a very successful outcome. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I would like to mention that as a team, myself and Dr. Manisha, we work in a lot in various areas, whether it is endometriosis, laparoscopy, or hysteroscopy. So where that, we have a very team where we coordinate, and whenever I need some help, she comes in, and whenever she needs, I come in. So it is a very good teamwork we have.